Hi, welcome to the Wide Open Road Arts Roving Conversation series. Today we're talking with Melbourne-based artist Elizabeth West. Elizabeth has worked with Wide Open Road Art a number of times in recent years. She works primarily with weaving, adapting this historical process to modern contexts as she reflects upon environments, resources, time and transformation.
Okay, so the first one was, tell me about your practice. What drives it materially and conceptually?
What I'm showing and what I respond to generally are like temporary public art installations where I weave with salvaged plastics.
Yeah.
But then I also paint and I play with plaster and I work with found objects and I draw. Intermittently I'll go through phases where I draw a lot, and I love drawing just as a medium in itself, but I take a lot of photographs, but I don't really look to them as a fine art kind of practice, but that capacity is definitely there. And I got more and more into my photography documenting my own work because I found that to be really crucial as my practice developed, especially doing temporary works. You need that documentation, and if the documentation isn't there, then you know, sometimes you don't even, and that's what I was faced with my most recent project, was the weight of how significant the documentation is if something's time-based, because I wasn't actually going to have a physical artwork to have photographs of or be able to exhibit again. And so I think with the plastics, or with the materials in general, I just get fascinated by what's possible, and it is very grounded in process. And so that's sort of similar with some of those materials that I work with, but with the plastics and with found objects, it's very much about this process of collecting and or deconstructing something, and then through that deconstruction a transformation occurs, and then there's some kind of object or product at the end of that. And with my most recent one, that kind of transformation was not there, and that really challenged me because I didn't then get what I needed from.
Do you feel like that's something that will come over a few works? Like, does the transformation always happen in one work?
Well, with the plastics, it's kind of straightforward. So it's sort of collecting them and then having them and then sitting down and slowing down to weave them. But with this work contained, it was a sort of a time-based installation work, so I collected all these containers and then set them up in a pattern on the day that it was happening for other people to take the pattern apart. So I didn't get that time in the studio with the material to actually transform it. Even though there was a transformation that occurred, it was more limited, and that made me really realise how important that transformation time is for me in my practice.
So is that an issue with public or with community-based art? Because if you're putting it out there, then you're sort of handing over the transformation.
To this participatory aspect, and I've sort of flagged that as I'm really interested in moving into that avenue and moving into more community-based projects and participatory possibilities. And I want to work towards sort of this concept of creative activation and how many people can I activate to be a part of a project, like really thinking big with that.
That's a great word for it, actually.
Yeah, I really like that concept, and I want to start writing about that. But then I've also flagged that has to be balanced with me producing my own works and whether they're for public art opportunities or not. I'm pushing myself to come to this point where I really need to develop a healthier, more consistent relationship to studio practice, because I've never really had that. I sort of seek an opportunity so that it situates me in a position where I have to create, which is interesting, you know, that I still, as much as I value creating, I kind of need a reason to do it.
I think that's so common. What do you think, when you said that some of those things are less of a fine art thing, or they don't feel like a fine art, what makes some,
I think I don't situate my photography, because I'm not sort of, I take photos all the time on my phone, and like when my camera's around, I'll take photos on the camera if I visit a place or something, and I really like that kind of documentary style photography. Like I like kind of documenting my life, and especially as a transient being in different places, I really enjoy that. But I never sort of look to that as something to sit down and go, oh, maybe I should exhibit a series of images.
Yeah.
But I mean, it's kind of always there in the back of my mind, because it's probably my most consistent creative practice over time.
Isn't that interesting?
Yeah.
I think that's so interesting that we all have this idea about what our practice is, but then there are like most people, there are all these other little things you do around the outside, which if you're a creative person are creative anyway. And but we don't see them as our art. Cooking or whatever.
Yeah, exactly. And I was talking to someone the other day who, you know, the work that she's exhibiting is mostly illustrative, but she's like, I make sculptures and I make jewelry and I do all these other things and I take photos and I make videos. She's like, but I do them for me. And they just somehow, even if some of them are really different, they're a part of my practice and they maybe inform what I am exhibiting, but maybe they don't. And that made me feel like, I was like, well, yeah, I can just have those things for me.
Yeah.
But then there's also now this interest in going, well, I also have that. Can I, you know, and this is something I'm getting interested in is if I have skills, because I think that after like taking photos for 2/3 of my life, I have a really innate kind of capacity with the camera, and could I develop that as a skill so that I can support myself through a creative means and then move into just really supporting myself through my creativity. Well,
which actually I just want to, I should have got a pen, but that takes me to another question which I'll ask since we're there, which was the one about in the current political climate, support for the arts is low. How do you manage to get by as an artist or incorporate art making into your life?
Yeah.
So that sort of ties in with what you were just saying.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I'm at this real flux point where I'm really wanting to, I think it's really ideological in a way, and I think that what we're all battling against as artists is this belief, you know, what a lot of people say to you, and what my parents said to me was, well, my parents said to me, you can do anything, but you can't do that.
Oh, really?
So that was a huge personal battle for me for a long time to overcome that.
Yeah.
And I think that kind of fits in with this view in society that not everyone has, but it is a really dominant belief. And I've read things in the past where people write about it, this mythology that keeps us locked into a certain view as well, and capacity or potential, where we believe artists are poor, like the starving artist myth. And I think that it's really unhealthy.
So unhealthy.
And I think that it's kind of like, it's so limiting. And I've been working with this all year to sort of find a mantra for myself that challenges that fits for me. And just before I came back to Melbourne, the words kind of clicked, and it went from, like, I started saying to myself, I make money from my art.
Yeah, right.
And then I've been sort of saying that to myself all year, and I'm like, no, it's more than that. And then just recently they clicked, and it became, I support myself sustainably through my creativity.
Yeah, right.
Which is, it sort of takes it out of that context about being just a transactional thing, I think. And
well, and it also takes it away from money. So you might be supporting yourself in other ways. You might be getting by, and it doesn't necessarily have
that direct relationship. And because what's sustainable might not be an income, you know, like it might not be income based. But I'm sort of working with that and looking at how I can. I've worked with affirmations before, like a long time ago. I'm not super into them, but it feels really important to work with this because I am exhausted. This year I've been working, you know, and this is what do I do to get by?
Yeah.
I work like 30 to 40 hours a week in other roles, in other industries don't actually, you know, where I'm not using my creative capacity so much. And then on top of that, work anywhere between 20 to like 30 hours in my practice.
I mean, that's so crazy.
And it's sort of like, but then at the end of the day, I'm still not I mean, I think that art is a very different kind of career. It's not, the best advice that I ever had about that was from a gallerist, Damien Minton, who started in Newcastle, and I went to Newcastle Art School just for a little bit, and he came and gave a talk, and he sort of said, in the art world, he's like, most other industries, there's a ladder, and you go into that industry and you climb the ladder, and there's really sort of a step-by-step process. It doesn't mean that it's always linear, but it's far more linear than the art world. Yeah. Whereas, like, as an artist, he's like, the beauty and the challenge is that you need to see it like concentric circles. So you and your work are sort of at the center of your own world. And how can I then sort of put out...
That's such a nice
so
model.
That there's like a drop pull kind of effect, and that by what I'm putting out starts to resonate with people and draw them to me. And I actually, you know, you guys reaching out for this recent project to me sort of was one of those moments where I'm like, cool, like I'm connecting with people, and that is starting to happen.
So it does, and I think the more you know, you start and then it grows. I hope that's what I'm counting on.
Me too. I'm concerned about, you know, seeking opportunities still based within that industry, but where I might be able to use a bit more of my creative capacity. Because I'm like, will that activate me more in my practice, or will that actually mean that I have less energy for my practice?
That's a really, really good one. I wonder about that all the time. Is it better to try and get a job that's like a little bit creative, because then you're feeding that side of yourself, or does that just sap your creativity and you'd be better off just, you know, pulling pints and making your art?
And keeping it kind of separate. But then I think as well, you know, the ultimate outlook with the studies that I've done in art therapy was, can I move towards working for myself for most of the week in that as a more supportive way, so that then I'm organising my time and I'm organising my week so that it's far more complementary to my practice. But then there's so many challenges involved in that as well. And
that's very draining, I think, too.
But
then it could also be really feeding.
Inspiring. Well, one of the reasons that I am so transient is because I want to be flexible to respond to opportunities that suit me, and they're not all in the same place. And I think in this field that I've been focusing on in temporary public art, there's only so much temporary public art happening in Melbourne or Sydney.
Of course,
and so I like going between the both, and I think that my work, I'm really starting to understand my work being about environment, so being able to move through different environments is important to me as well.
I think of some of the important roles of the modern artist.
Look, I really sort of building on what we were saying before about that myth of like the starving artist, I think that it's really important. I think that the role that we have is to challenge that, and I think that, you know, something that I feel so grateful for as an artist, which is sort of separate to that, but maybe, I mean, it fits in with that dynamic. I think that the role that we have is to look at the world. Artists have this role where they can really criticise things and be so dissonant because they exist outside of those institutions.
So in a way that sounds like, which ties into one of the other questions, it sounds like you would say that artists have a social responsibility.
I think so. That was when I was thinking about that, I think that's their main social responsibility, is to bring a different perspective. And then I think that and also to stand for the value in creativity and the value in the art practice. Like it may just be that, you know, I see just as much value in in my practice as seeking temporary public art opportunities as someone who's picked up and started painting watercolours in their retirement because that's fulfilling for them. But then I think that social responsibility that we have as artists is to stand up for that, you know. And so when someone sort of is like, oh, you're just doing that because you've got time now, being able to go, no, I'm doing it because it's fulfilling for me and it's really important. There's actually a lot of writing about this one, but between like Apollo and Dionysus. And so like the Apollonian kind of outlook is that everything is structured, everything is ordered, everything is rigid, and that is how we live. Like look at the cities that we've created, and the institutional processes that we've created, whereas in that Dionysian outlook is like, oh, chaos, you know, and there's a huge tension there, and I think that creativity definitely fits into that. And then because of this dominant kind of paradigm where everything's ordered and structured, it's really challenging to incorporate it. But I know that at various levels it is, and I think it's necessary to go, well, how can we weave that into those structures, and how can we, as artists or as art therapists or wanting to work in community arts through some other kind of modality, in mental health, how can we weave that into the structures and give people a different experience of it?
I would actually argue that it's when you weave things, when you like, because if you've got the Dionysus and it's all then that can be a bit like hard to grasp and make sense of. And I think sometimes when you do weave it into the structures, that's when you get something really great.
Definitely.
They feed each other.
Because I think that we need to, we need that tension of opposites, but we need to work on integrating them into one another. We have to work with the structures that are there.
Yeah.
We can't rip the structure out and then rebuild. We sort of got to work into it and be affecting change and rebuilding within the structures that are there.
Or how would you describe your connection to other artists or an art making community?
It's definitely evolved. Melbourne, I sound like I'm ratting on Sydney, but
that's fine.
I sort of left Sydney because I was really disillusioned, like not having gone through an art school in Sydney. I felt incredibly disconnected from, I knew that there were creative communities there, but I felt like I couldn't access them. And
why do you think that was? Why were they hard?
I sort of, in my experience at the time, and I was sitting with a lot of personal stuff to work through as well, which sort of inhibited me a lot socially.
Yeah.
But I was part of a couple of group exhibitions, and maybe I just didn't have the social confidence to weave my way into those communities, but I just definitely found them not to be as open or welcoming, and definitely to be sort of more locked into location or study history. So like all the kids from one art school sort of hung out together and the other art school hung out together, and then there's like a huge creative community of like really broad kind of artists in Marrickville, but it's such a scene, and like I don't want to conform to that, and I don't like the idea that you have to be consistently present in order to feel like you fit in, because then when I came to Melbourne and sort of moved into warehouses, it was just so open, and people were like, you should talk to this person, and this person who doesn't, you know, who's a musician comes up and is like, I love what you're doing, and like it was just so overwhelmingly accessible, and that was really eye-opening for me. And that was like, I wouldn't have the practice that I have today if it wasn't for those opportunities, which was really, it felt like a nest, like, you know, to go through these different creative environments and be involved in different like collaborative projects, and also have people collaborate with me by helping me out with my projects that I was doing, and just the encouragement is really crucial. And then forming, like actually going like, yes, now I have friends who are artists that I can have a dialogue with across time and space. Like I mentioned, like sending each other articles or opportunities and tagging each other and things like that. But I'm at this point now, having stepped out of that, going like, how can I still access it even if I'm not living in those situations?
So do you feel like you do have to be actually living in those situations to feel a part of that?
To some degree, like I've sort of, where I'm showing the show next, I've really been able to just sort of step back into that environment. I stayed there for a few days and sort of met the people who are living in the space now, and I feel really comfortable there. And then as I started to have more conversations with some of those people and find out what their work was about, I really struck a chord with someone, and I have this like collaborative concept, and he was like, this is awesome, you know. So I think that it's nice to have somewhere for me that I can step back into, and it doesn't feel like I have to be there to access it. But then what I find hard with that is the continuity. It's like, that we've sort of planted that seed, but from afar, how can we nourish that? And I think that it has to be a really strong idea, and that you have to be a bit I'm learning like to get things like to follow through. You have to be a bit pushy.
You do, don't you? Yes.
And that feels a bit strange.
Yeah, but especially if you're not there. And also I find that, you know, as time goes by, I feel that, because I used to be all like, oh, it'll happen, but now it's like, actually, years are going by. If you want it to happen, you have to make it happen.
I sort of, and I have a bit of tension around that sort of, I did see a lot in the warehouses, like it was this duality. There's a lot of that, like, laissez-faire kind of culture, like, yeah, I'm out, I do, like,
yeah.
But that's when it's all nebulous and it's out here.
Yes.
And then I've, like, over the last 5 years, I've become really grounded, like, how can we cement this, you know, and pull that down here into the here and now. And it challenges a lot of people, because I sort of want to do that really strongly, because I want to see things happen.
Yeah,
like,
I mean, I think that's exciting.
Yeah, definitely.
So where do you go, or what do you do for inspiration?
I was thinking about that, and I think that one of the biggest things that does inspire me is different environments.
Hence why you move around all the time.
Yeah, being transient is such an inspiration to me, and there's something about the periods of transition and literally being in transit is a time for me when I process a lot and when I have a lot of ideas, or when I sort of like pick up on an idea that I've had, because I feel like when I'm in transit, like waiting at the airport and about to get on the plane, and while I'm on a plane, I feel like I'm in this kind of time warp where then I can sort of go really deeply into an idea that I've been having.
Right.
Yeah.
So travel,
definitely. And then like responding to, another one is responding to opportunities. Like I definitely feel like my imagination really performs to, like when there's sort of like a join the dots, it's like, okay, you've got these 4 corner posts, you know, of what your parameters are, what can you do with that? That's really inspiring to me. And I've sort of, but I'm glad to be at a point where I've definitely, through having that pattern of responding, I am at a point now where there's works and like different series that I want to develop that are coming from another place. Like they've emerged through that, but they can go beyond that and sort of be more studio-based works.
And that sounds, again, what you're saying about the 4 posts and then what can you do within that. That makes me think again of what you're saying about the Dionysus and Apollo. It's that thing again, isn't it?
Yes.
The posts to Apollo.
Having a bit of structure, you know. But then also, I mean, and this is something I'm still trying to unpack, when I made an artwork earlier this year, back in autumn, and I had a month, and this is the first time in my life that I actually gave myself, you know, compromised on certain things so that I could have time and space to just go into my work. That was such an inspiration to me, to really drop out of the Apollonian world and just be me in my practice, not having to worry about anything else or think about anything else. That was super generative for me, and like came out of that with really expansive ideas and like long-term ideas as well. I think everyone needs that. Definitely.
So did we discuss what you consider to be good art? We kind of...
Well, that one came up when it was sort of, when I was talking about dialectics. Like, so I think that really challenges me, because I place, like I mentioned, like I place, especially with an art therapy perspective, which is influenced by this philosophy of phenomenology. And so that philosophy in operation in a session is, how can we look to an artwork and value whatever's there rather than evaluate it? So there's no good or bad,
so
right or
it would
wrong.
be more like, it's, well, you don't want to use the word good, but if you were going to use the word good, then it would be good if there was a process, or if it was genuine or something. Would that be... But then I guess even if it wasn't genuine, if that's what they need to do, then that's okay too.
And it's challenging. And so I've actually, like, when I sort of, that phrase about how can we value rather than evaluate, I've had conversations with a lot of very like rational friends who've sort of been like, but evaluation is important for certain things and at times, and there's that's a bit unresolved for me, because I think that definitely, but I also think that if we looked to an evaluation process to be more based in value, that it could be of more value. That's turning back on itself.
So if you don't consider to be good and bad art, is there art that makes you feel good versus art that makes you feel not so good?
I find myself to be like a bit challenged by really overtly political works.
Okay. Which is interesting, because I would say your practice was political.
Yeah. Definitely. But I think it's sort of political in a gentle way. And so that was something that I remember having. It was a really pivotal moment for me, having a conversation with an artist who was much older than me, and me reflecting on her work and just being overwhelmed by how beautiful it was and how intricate. And she was like, but her works were incredibly political and talking about really difficult histories and revealing histories of like Indigenous culture. And she's like, yes, but what I found is that, you know, you want to sustain engagement with this concept, and you're going to do that far more through beauty than through shocking people, because shock is really polarizing. And I think that it's part of the dominant dialogues as well. So we're fed this news culture, this media culture. It's in your face, in your face, in your face. Shots of people being shot, shots of people bleeding, shots of people starving, like, and it has an impact, definitely, but it also has a recoil factor.
Yeah, and it shuts you down too. You become
and you become desensitized. And so I think, I mean, something that I love and that I'm sort of, it's another avenue in my practice that I'm really interested to develop. Like, I remember watching the documentary about Ai Weiwei, and there was, in that, he sort of discusses this process where, for a particular work, there was earthquakes in provinces in China, and buildings that have been built by the governments, like schools that have been built by the governments, completely collapsed, and so many thousands of children died. And there was no, like, the government, they don't even try to cover it up, but they just ignore it. And so he gathered this team of people to actually start, like, recording the names and visiting, and like, I just find works like that to be so powerful, because there's this human contact as well, and like someone actually going to the parents and being like, you know, how many children, but there's this opportunity for them to have a moment of compassion and for them to feel like they're being heard. And then I think the first sort of iteration of that work was a display of these lists of names, and then I'm pretty sure it was in Germany for like a big art thing. He actually, so there was a certain number of however many thousand, and he got that many backpacks and put them on the outside of a building. And that's that thing, like, it's such a curious spectacle, but there's something so heavy behind that. And I think that when we start playing with scale and spectacle, that's when we can have those dialogues about really challenging ideas.
Yeah, I think that's a really good way of doing it. So the final one was, what is your dream art collaboration if history, geography and money were no barrier?
I was really struck by that, because that sort of brought up the 4 pillars thing for me again. I was like, oh, I can't even imagine, because I sort of need some parameters, but that made me think about...
No barrier.
Yeah, it made me think about something that's really inspired me since I came across it last year, is an artist, Michael Heiser. And he's a painter, I think, as well, but he's sort of known for earthworks and like conceptual works. And then he's been building this work in, I can't remember, is it the Nevada desert? I'm not sure, but in the desert in America for 20 years.
Oh my goodness.
And it's called The City, and it's essentially going to be like one of the world's largest sculptures when it's finished.
Wow.
And he's actually excavating the earth and then building structures out of those materials that he's excavated, which is much like what we've done with the earth. And I'm like, I want to be like on the list to go and see it when it opens.